everybody. I'm going to go over some of the material on Chapter 6 today. So, as always, I'd like you to go out to the P drive for the class. There's a folder out there with today's date on it. If you'd copy that folder over to your virtual desktop and start up Visual Studio, we'll kind of take it from there. We're going to do this a little bit differently today, just so you're aware of it. So again, just like you, I'm going to go over to my P drive here. CIS 152, 142, C#, Spring 2015 in class, and there is a folder out there, as you can see right here with today's date on it, 3/16/2015. I'm going to drag that into my virtual desktop, choose copy, and then we'll start up in just a second. All right. Now I'm going to give the people who just came in here, I'm going to give you a second to catch up. This is where we are right now, but I wanted to show you this, and what I wanted to show you very quickly was what's in this folder. All right. All right, so there are two folders in here, one that's called Calculators and one that's called Joe's Automotive class. The program we're going to do as a class for Chapter 6 is the Joe's Automotive. All right, and just so you see this, what I've given you is I built the interface. So there it is. That's what you have. It's totally non-functional in that if I highlight all this stuff here, click Calculate, nothing happens, click Clear, nothing happens, and the exit button is functional. All right, so we're going to do that rather than having to take the time to have you go and build the interface and do that as a class. I just thought that would take too much time. All right, but what we're going to do before we do that, and I don't know how much time it'll take, maybe the whole first half of the period at least, what I did was I wrote a simple calculator program, and then I modified it 4 times. So we've got bad calculator, better calculator, even better calculator, best calculator, and best calculator with menus. They're all the same program. But what I did was I went from taking the code and sticking it under our buttons click routine to writing separate routines, which is what Chapter 6 is all about. All right, so we're going to talk about that first. All right, so again, if you just came in, please go out to the P drive for the class. In the in-class folder, find the folder with today's date on it. Copy that folder over to your virtual desktop. Start up Visual Studio. And we're going to look at the calculators folder. All right? So now that I brought that up here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up this first thing that's under the calculators folder that's called bad calculator. So I'm going to bring that up first of all. And like I said, I'm just going to walk through this with you. We'll take umpteen amount of time, whatever that is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so on each one of these that are in here. All right? So again, those of you who are just coming in, this is what we're doing. Go to the P drive for the class, copy the folder with today's date on it to your virtual desktop, start up Visual Studio, and I'm going to go over in this folder. There are a couple subfolders, and one of those folders in this folder is called Calculators, and I'm going to go over the examples that are in there. So if I bring that up, and again, the interface is exactly the same on each one. All I did was I changed up here where it says calculator iteration 1. It'll go from iteration 1 through iteration 5. And I gave each one of them a different color just so they'd stand out a little bit. But if we look at this one, we look at this example right here, what I want to show you is this. That for each one of the buttons that are in here, so add, multiply, subtract, and divide, for each one of those buttons, we've got the code inline, right inside of the button's click routine. That's considered a very poor programming practice. Why? We'll get into that in Chapter 6, and we'll look at that in just a little bit. What I want to show you, though, is if I run this, the program works just fine. If I don't put anything in there, I get the input error, non-numeric input, okay? And it handles both it allows you to add, subtract, multiply, divide. The divide, I set it up so it would give you a decimal answer. The clear works. The exit works. All right, I'm not going to exit, but notice if I come in here and do a 12 and I do a 0, I can add, I can subtract, I can multiply, and notice when I go into divide, I even check for that. So it's not a perfect program, but what I wanted to show you was all the code is in there to make it run, for lack of better words, successfully. All right? So that's the first iteration of it. And that's all I'm going to say about that iteration. All right? So I'm going to jump into number 2, which is better calculator. Notice they all say bad calculator because I just did a copy and paste from the original one. And then I changed the name of the outlying folder. All right? So I'm bringing up the second iteration. And you'll notice that other than the color, it looks just like the first one did. All right? But things start to change when we go in here. So notice when we add. All right? Notice now in the add routine, I'm calling a routine called validate numbers. And I'm calling that whether I'm adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. So already what I've done, as opposed to the first iteration of that program, in that first iteration of the program, since I had all the code inline, I did the same try and catch 4 different times, which is silly to do that. It's a duplication of code. If I wanted to change it someplace, I had to change it 4 times. But now I only have to change it in one place because this validate numbers is doing that same try catch. And it's doing a try on number 1 and on number 2. Now, what I really probably should have done is had a separate one validate for the first number and one validate for the second number. When I run this program, it looks exactly like the first one. So again, that's all the same. Okay, and again, if I tried to divide by 0, I again get the illegal divide. So everything works exactly the same way that it worked for the first one. So let's just concentrate on what's changed. So we'll grab the add. So notice when we add, we validate the numbers. What that is doing right there, that is a call to a method I wrote. So I wrote a method in there that's called validate numbers. Okay? Now, a couple things that you're going to have to be leery of. This is an object-oriented programming language. So what I'm going to call these are methods, okay? And what a method is it's a routine that either is pre-written or one you write in an object-oriented programming language. Now, that said, in this chapter, what the author does is he separates methods into 2 different types. One are subs or subroutines, and the other one are functions. The difference in this language between a subroutine and a function is a function must return something and a sub cannot return something. So that's the first thing for you to remember. A sub does not return a value. A function must return a value. Okay? Well, why am I telling you that? Well, if you look in here, what you notice, for example, when we did our multiply and our divide, etc., Okay? Those are really right there. When you look at these are both subs. They're not functions. All right? They're not returning values. They all require something to be passed in. And we've talked about what that stuff is before. But let's talk about this new routine. Validate numbers. Okay? So if we come down here and we start to look at validate numbers, it looks a little bit different from the stuff we've written before. It says private, where those said private, good. It says void, where those said void. Okay, that's still the same. It says validate numbers, which is just the name, and it has nothing in the parentheses, which means I don't have to pass anything into the routine. Okay? So this is my routine. It's called validate numbers. I could have called it anything I wanted to. It's nice when you write your own routines to give them names that reflect what you're trying to do with the routine. I'm trying to validate numbers here, so I called it validate numbers. Just in the same way that I called my divide button, button divide. All right, same kind of thing. So with each one of these, what are we doing? We're calling validate numbers. Then we're saying res equal num1 minus num2 for the subtract, num1 times num2 for the multiply. For the divide, I'm checking to make sure that the denominator is not 0. And if it's not, I do the divide. Otherwise, I just put in there illegal divide. All right. And for the add, we're just adding them. Then we're taking and we're taking the result and throwing it into our text box and throwing it into our text box and throwing it into our text box and throwing it into our text box. Hopefully, one thing you realize is, again, we're pretty much duplicating the same thing in that line that's highlighted right now. This one's a little different because I am setting it up to be 2 decimal places, but there's duplication of code. As a programmer, one of the things that you want to look for is to minimize code duplication as much as possible. I may have even said this acronym to you already, but it's one of the programmer's credos, and it's DRY. All right, that's an acronym. Do not repeat yourself. That's what it stands for. So whenever possible, you should try not to repeat yourself. All right? So that's version 2. If I jump up here to version 3, again, as I already mentioned to you, they're all going to look the same. They're all going to run exactly the same. The only difference is the color, and now this one says iteration 3. The second one, hopefully at least, if I remember to change it, said iteration 2. The first one, iteration 1. All right? And if we look at this one, now notice I have taken and written separate routines for validate number 1 and validate number 2. In an ideal world as a programmer, every one of these routines that you write should be doing one thing and only one thing. That's the good news. The bad news is that's not how programmers write things. Let's imagine for a second that I had a form. All right, I don't care if it's an HTML form. I don't care what it is, but I've got some kind of a form. And that form has 10 pieces of information in it that most forms would have. First name, middle initial, last name, address, city, state, zip code. All right, maybe your social security number. All right, cell phone number, and maybe a home phone number or something like that. 10 pieces of information. If I was writing true code the way that you're supposed to as a programmer, I'd write 10 different routines. And the reason for that is if I had a problem with any of those 10 pieces of information, I'd know right where to go to. I'd go right to the routine because each routine would be doing one thing. Problem with that is it's too much work, and most people don't like to do too much work when they don't think they have to. So what most people end up doing is instead of doing that, is they might write just one routine and check all 10 different things in there. The problem with doing that is as time goes on, if you end up adding more things and more things and more things and more things, you might now have 10, 15, 20, 30 things, and they're all being handled in the same routine. Now you run into a problem, and instead of sitting there and breaking your code up into individual units, modularizing your code, now you've got to look through this big mess. All right? So the idea is, what I'm doing here is I'm starting to do modularization. So I'm validating number 1 there, and I'm validating number 2 here. All right. And what you're going to notice when I go through this is there's validate number 1. It's not really it's not a very big routine. But when you look at it, wow, you look in here, look, boom. And then you look at the next one, they're exactly identical, except the first one says num1, the second one says num2. That says text box number 2, the other one says text box number 1. These both say text box number 2, and the other ones say text box number 1. So I probably could, even write it and keep simplifying it and simplifying it and simplifying. All right. But what I'm trying to get across to you is what we're doing in here is we keep modularizing. We keep breaking this stuff up. Again, you see absolutely no difference when you run the program. Still runs the same. Everything works exactly the same as it did before. All right. So here's iteration 4 of the same program. So now notice when I go to add, now what am I doing? What I'm doing with that click routine is I'm using that click routine as what's referred to as a driver. Rather than doing any code in the click routine, I'm using the click routine to call other routines. So for each one of these, I'm calling validate number 1 and validate number 2. Then I'm calling add, and what's add doing? Not much. It's doing the same thing as add, subtract, multiply, and my divide. All right. And then when I get done with those, with each one of them, I'm calling attach result. So these are all routines that I wrote. I wrote validate number 1. I wrote validate number 2. I wrote multiply. I wrote attach result. And the attach result just does this. The only difference is now for all 4 of the different operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, I'm handling all of them the same way, so they're all going to be 2 decimal places when you do the answer. All right. You can make your case and say, well, that's kind of stupid because you're only allowing integers, so if I've got 12 and I've got 7 here, that really should be 19 and 19 point, not 19.0. I can live with that. All right. But it still works exactly the same way. All right. Now, if I'm listening to this, and I've never heard any of this stuff before, I'm saying, okay, that's everything fine. I even get it. My question is, why the hell don't you put everything in there? Well, I don't understand why. It all worked, so why are we pulling it out of there? All right. Well, that gets us to the last iteration of this. Oops, that's not the one I want to show you. That is. Again, looks the same. It's iteration 5. But now, you may or may not have noticed, what do we have in here? I added menus. All right. Now, is that big a thing? No. Except now when I run the program and I enter my numbers, I can either click add or I can go up to operation add. Now, why is that important? As time goes on, if I decide I'm going to do a lot more stuff in here, maybe make it look like a real calculator, or maybe I want to do square root and tangents and all that good stuff, I might get to the point where I got too many buttons. So I start to get rid of the buttons. Well, notice if I call add, sorry, let me stop it. If I call add from here, all it does is it calls now just one routine called addition. And addition calls all those other ones. Did I have to do that? No. All right, I could have left all the code in there, so why didn't I? Well, notice if I go to operation and I go to add, I also call addition. So I'm able to call the same code from two different places. That's why you modularize. That's why you write routines, so that you can call them over and over again from different places. So in other words, I'm calling add from here and from here, subtract from here and from here, multiply from here and from here, and divide from here and from here. And I'm not even going to say, do you get that? Because you know what? You all do. How do I know that? Because you're all used to going up to here to file, and then maybe doing a save all, or maybe clicking that triple disk icon, or maybe doing Control-Shift-S. That's 3 different operations that are giving you the same result. That's kind of what I'm trying to show you right here. All right? So keep that in mind. Like I said, I had no idea how long this would take, but I put that out there. If that's something that can help you as you're working on the homework or whatever, then go for it. All right? Now, I ran through that quickly. We only spent about 15 or 20 minutes on it. But as we went through it, is there anything that we just went through that didn't make sense, that you need further explanation on? We're going to hear it again. You're going to see it in the Joe's example, all right? And you're going to see it in when we go over the work for Chapter 6. All right? Now, let me show you. I'm going to literally stop the run here. So I'm going to close this. All right, so I've got nothing up here right now. But what I want to show you is for Chapter 6, you don't have to bring this up or anything, but just so you see these. In the homework, I already have your executables out there for Chapter 6. So if I click here, this is the one we're going to be working on right now. If you copied over that folder as I asked you to do at the beginning of class, you already have this built. I'm not going to concentrate on the interface. I know with some of you, you'll say, yeah, but that's the fun part. Well, tough. All right, if you don't like that, then go back and rebuild the interface on your own. That's okay. All right. But right now, if I click all this stuff, on the example that we have, so if I come in here and say our parts were $100 and our labor, we had $10 worth of, or 10 hours worth of labor. If I click this now, in the example that I had you copy, there's no code in it. But now this is what we're going to get. All right, when we get done. And of course the clear will work, and of course the exit will work. All right, so that's what we're going to get to. The other one that you're going to be working on in here is this one. Literally, it's a game of rock, paper, scissors. All right, and these are the images that the book gave. You can use those. You don't have to use them. But notice if I come in here and I say I choose rock, all right, then the computer chooses paper. The computer wins. It now has, hopefully you get the idea of what's going on there. All right, that's what you're going to programmatically sync up. Now, what I did was I put those images there, and I put a couple other ones. There's paper. There's rock. There's scissors. There's a whole bunch of them out there. You can use literally just about anything you want. All right? Those are the ones that the book had. So I also have, there's paper. You want to use fingers. There's rock. And there's scissors. You can use any ones you want or create your own. I've given this assignment several times over the years, and I've had people who've literally gone out, either made their own or gone out and found online, where rock crushes scissors, and they literally have a rock falling on scissors and break. I don't care if you want to do that. I'm more concerned that you get it to work than you have, wow, what a super cool interface. It doesn't do anything, but it looks really cool. That doesn't mean much. All right, so that's what you're going to be working on. The idea is between today and Wednesday, we're going to do 2 things. Now we're going to jump right into the Joe's program and finish that up. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to lecture on Chapter 6, as we've been doing then next week. So the week of the 23rd, the Monday, the 23rd, and Wednesday, the 25th, will both be lab. All right. Then we're going to go into Chapter 7, and we're going to be getting into arrays. Then we're going to go into Chapter 8. You're not even going to get an assignment on that one. I think Chapter 7 might be your last actual assignment. All right. So again, if you have not already done so, make sure you go out to the P drive for the class, find the folder with today's date on it. If you haven't started up Visual Studio, start it up. And don't worry now about the calculators folder. Let's bring up the other one that's in here. The other one that's in here, whoops, I don't want to do that yet. The other one that's in here then is the Joe's Automotive. It says Joe's Automotive class. So let's, don't want to do that. Bring that one up. All right. Now, I'm going to bring up some terminology here. I'm going to talk about some things that are in Chapter 6. I'm not going to ask, but my guess is, if I did say to you, okay, how many people read Chapter 6 over the break? And I said, be real honest, probably most hands would not go up. Mine wouldn't go up. All right, and probably most of yours would not go up. So what I'm going to do is very quickly go over what they show at the end of Chapter 6 in your book, and then we'll start talking about it. Again, if it doesn't totally make sense, bless you, if it doesn't totally make sense, ideally at least, it will as we start going through this. Okay, so here it is. This is literally from your book. It looks like on page 385. Now, it's a little bit dated. I don't know of anybody who does labor for $20 an hour, but that isn't the point. That's not that important. You could always change that as time goes on. But what we're assuming here is that you are creating this app for Joe's Automotive Services. First thing to note, and please listen to this, if you decide you're going to start back all over on your own, which would be fine. When you're naming anything, don't put an apostrophe in there. Even if it takes it. I've had this happen before where it takes it and everything's working fine, it's all hunky-dory, and then, you know, somebody's been working on it for a week, they bring it up and now it locks and it doesn't work. Microsoft recommends that you don't put special characters, of which the apostrophe is one, or even blank spaces in your names. So if you notice on here, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, oil and lube. Well, those two are together, and they're inside of this group box called oil and lube. And then we've got radiator flush and transmission flush, and they're in their own group box called flushes. Then we've got an inspection, a muffler replacement, and a tire rotation, and they're in a group box that's called miscellaneous. Then we've got another group box here that's called parts, and one that's called labor. And another group box here that's going to have our final totals in there. All right? But the idea is what we want to do in this case, which we have not been doing in the past, is when we click these different things, these different buttons, instead of putting the code inline in those buttons, we want to have those buttons click routines be calling routines to do our work. All right? So we are starting to modularize our programs. Ideally, when you start to modularize, and I've given this example before, it's not a great one, but it'll work at least for now. Let's say that you're writing a program. The program has 500 lines. If you're using an older language, for example, like COBOL, all right, if you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. But if you're using a language like that, you've got a program with 500 lines in it, chances are you'd have about 10 routines, and each routine would be 50 lines each. When you start using the object-oriented programming languages and you've got a program that's got 500 lines, chances are you're going to have 50 routines of 10 lines each. So you write smaller routines. And the idea, again, is they're doing one and only one thing. So you are modularizing to the hilt. And that's what this is about in here. So the author says, you know, here's your specs, and they again, keep going here on page 386. the application should have the following value returning methods. In other words, these are really functions because they'll return something. Now, one thing about C# doesn't really differentiate between subs and functions. Visual Basic.net does, but C# really doesn't. The only difference in C# between a value returning method and one that does not return anything, there's two differences. One, if it doesn't return anything, its return type has to be the word void, and it doesn't have a return statement in it. All right. If it's a value returning method, the return type cannot be void, and it must have one or more return statements in there. So these routines that you're going to see, oil loop charges, flush charges, miss charges, other charges, tax charges, and total charges, all of these will have a return statement in there, and all of them, the return type will not be void. We can either make it decimal or we could make it double. Either one of them would be fine. All right. The ones that you see here it says they should have the following void methods called when the user clicks the clear button. So when you click the clear button, it should call this routine, then call this routine, then call this routine, then call this routine, then call this routine. You'll notice there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, and they will clear out whatever's in there, whatever's in there, whatever's in there, whatever's in there, and whatever is in there. All right? That's the guise of the whole program. Now, what I could have done, and I've done this in the past, is gone over this program as a class, and then they had you do this one, which was a thing for hospital charges, because it's very similar. The program is very similar. All right. I've done that. I've also given people prime numbers and the rock, paper, scissors, which is what I gave to you right now. We'll go over that, just not right now. All right. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to come in here and bring up, I've got it up right now, the Joe's. So this is it. But again, when you look in here, what you're going to notice is there's the comment. And I left in here for you all of the variables that I used, the constants, I should say, and the variables. I left the code in there for the exit button. I left the calls in there for the clear button. But all the rest of the stuff that's in there, notice it has nothing in it. The only thing I did put something in were all these ones that return something. I just put return 0 in there. So what we're going to start doing right now is we're going to write all of these different routines. That makes sense to everybody? All right. And I should have, didn't, but I should have put comments on all these. But hopefully they make sense. In other words, an oil change costs you $26. A lube costs you $18. Radiator flush is $30. Transmission flush is $80. An inspection for your car is $15. Muffler replacement is $100. Tire rotation is $20. Labor is $20 an hour. And the tax rate is 6%. Does all that make sense? Again, it may have made more sense, as I told you, to make those type decimal as opposed to making them type double as I did. Works fine the way it is. All right. This will be what our parts charge is. This will be the oil lube charge. Now take a look at what's in gray up there. And what I'm going to tell you right now should make sense to you. That thing right there, that oil lube charge, that's going to be the addition of what's ever in here. So either it's going to be 0 because neither one of them are checked, 26 because that one's checked and that one isn't, 18 because that one's checked and that one isn't, or 44 because they're both checked. Does that make sense? And we could do the same thing with a trans, this will be one of 4 values, this will be one of like 6 values, all right, etc. Does all that stuff make sense to people? That's what you have to code for. The other thing is when you run this program, I have no idea when I run this if I'm going to check them both, if I check this one first and then this one, or if I check this one first and then this one. All right, and the reason I'm telling you that is I've had people turned this program in the past and wrote it wrong. Because this should not be put in there as an if-else statement. This should be put in as one if. This should be put in as another if. All right? And when you do that, you want to use like a plus equals, because again, I don't know if I'm going to say 26 plus 18 or if I'm going to say 18 plus 26. But either way, I have to be able to account for it. All right? So again, ideally when we get done, we click calculate, it's going to check everything that's in here, and it's going to fill up the stuff that's in here based on what we've entered in here. The clear won't take very long. We'll do that hopefully by the break. But the idea is when we click clear, that'll if it looks like this, and I click clear, when I get done, it's going to look like that, and there's going to be nothing in there either. All right? Again, hopefully that just makes sense to people. All right. So I'm taking for granted that you've all brought this up. You've got it up there on the system so we can start making changes to it. All right. And I want to tell you, I was grading Saturday and I was grading Sunday. To my knowledge, I'm all caught up, at least as of yesterday afternoon. All right. And some of you are behind. If you are, you know who you are. I'm not looking at anybody. I'm not saying anything. I did do the 9-week grades. They're due Wednesday. And everybody got an S. Just because you got an S, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't mean diddly. It means that you got an S. Okay? That's it. And I hate giving out U's. And I've had one person in one class has dropped. That was easy. That was a W. All right. So I'm going to come in here and start looking at the code. And again, I want to start writing those 5 routines. And that's what we're going to do right now. Okay? And they're almost all the same, to be honest with you. Almost every one of these is the same. Because again, this clear oil lube. I've got to go in and say, okay, what's that checkbox called? It's called checkbox oil change, checkbox lube job. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that when I go in there, I set checked equal to false. Does that make sense? What that does is it says if it was currently checked, uncheck it. If it was already unchecked, it doesn't hurt anything to do that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come in here, whoops, and I want to write in checkbox oil change dot checked equal false. And I want to do the same thing that's it. I'm going to save. Now, don't worry, I'll come right back to it, but I want to show you what we just did. All right? So now when I run this, if these are both checked, notice what happens now when I click the clear button. All right? That should make sense to you. And it doesn't matter if none of them are checked, if only one of them is checked, or if they're both checked. Clicking the clear button now cleared both those out, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So that's the one for the clear oil lube. And we're going to write the clear flushes, the clear miss, the clear others, and the clear fees, one after the other. That should put us about where we should be to go take a break. John, did you get Ben's email? Okay. He got called for jury duty. He got called, and then they got canceled, then he got called again. So he's going to find out today how long he's going to be gone. All right. So we've already done clear oil lube. That's it right here. So let's do clear flushes. Alright, so I've got my first two routines written. Now you'll notice, and I'll come right back to it, but I'm going to keep doing this. Now if I check all four of these and click clear, now all four of them are unchecked. Alright, so far I've written clear oil lube and clear flushes. So I've got to clear miscellaneous, I've got to clear other, and I have to clear my totals. The next one is miscellaneous. There's 3 to do here. So now what you'll notice is now I've got 7 of these things. So I've got these 3 group boxes are now all done. So I've got to do this group box and this group box, all the stuff that's in here and all the stuff that's in here. All right. I'm taking it that even if you're a slow typist, you've already got that one in. Move that up a little bit. So I'm going to clear my other one now, and those are not those check boxes, those are text boxes. All right. So notice now when I go in, I'm just keep checking everything because that's how I am, no pun intended, checking it. I'm not doing anything yet here to check for type, but if I click clear, everything that's got something in it right now should be undone. And it is. Good. That's exactly what we wanted to have happen. So the only thing that's left is to clear what's in here. We've now done this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, and now we've got what's in here. Those were all text boxes, as are these. All right. Hopefully you've got the clear flushes stuff done, so I can move this up a little bit more, and I'll start doing the clear fees. That's everything. All right, so one more time, I just want to check it. I'm going to highlight everything now, and I'm going to write something everywhere. Now, hopefully you've seen. You take a look up on the screen here. It's not that it's a mistake, but you see these boxes right here? See those? I should have made those read-only, and I didn't. But I left it off so that now when I click clear, you see that everything's cleared. All right. So what I really should do in here, what I really should do is go back to here, highlight all 4 of these text boxes, go over to the read only, and set that equal to true for all of those. That would be a much better way to code. If you don't like the color, still might not like the color, but the idea is now when we come in here, we can still check all these. We can still put stuff in here, but we can't put anything in here anymore. All right. so far, at least in my opinion, you may or may not agree with this, but at least in my opinion, what we've done so far hasn't been very hard. We told the system that if you have a checkbox, uncheck it. And if you've got anything in the text box, remove what's there. All right. Any questions on any of that stuff? So we've so far handled all of this, all of this, all of this, and all of this. All right, but the point is, the problem is, so let's say we put something, and we'll put valid stuff in everything. So parts, $100. Labor, 10 hours. All right, the clear works, we already saw that, but the calculate doesn't work. All right, so the clear works, the exit works, so you could look at it and say, oh, we're 2/3 of the way done. I guess that's sort of true. All right, but looking in here at what we looked at before, all right, so we came in here, the interface is built, and all of these non-returning methods are done. So what we have to do yet, and we'll do this after the break, is oil loop charges, flush charges, miscellaneous charges, other charges, tax charges, and total charges. So we'll have to write those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 routines. All right, I'm going to give you a break in just a second, but before I do, just think about this. All right, again, that first routine is going to add up whatever's here. So it's going to be either 0, 26, 18, or 44. This is going to be either 0 or 30 or 80 or 110. This is either going to be 0 or some permutation of that all the way up to 135. This will have to make sure that that's numeric, and that'll have to be numeric, and they should both be positive. All right? And then what's in here, the services and labor, all right, well, that's the services, and that's the labor. So what's in this first box right here is going to be everything except parts. And he did it like this. I'm not sure why, but he wrote it like this because he said the only tax that he puts on here are parts. And it's 6% tax. All right. So that parts right there, that's going to handle just this. The tax will be the tax on this. And then this total fees will be the addition of this one, and this one, and this one. Now that should make sense to everyone in here. You're all smart enough people to understand that. So let's take a break. Let's come back at 9 o'clock, and we're going to start writing those other routines. I'm going to save this, and then I'll come right back to this page. So if you had a little trouble typing it in, it'll be up there literally in about a minute.